He said he was working late. That's what he always said. But something about that night felt different. So I did something I had never done before. I followed him. And where he went was not where a married man should be. It wasn't like me to question him. For years, I had trusted his words without hesitation. If he said he had a meeting, I believed him. If he said he'd be home late, I kept dinner warm and waited. That was our routine. Quiet, predictable, safe. At least, that's what I thought. But lately, something has shifted. Not in a loud way. Not in a way you could easily explain. It was subtle, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself. It just lingers in the air, until you can't ignore it anymore. He had started coming home later than usual, not once or twice, but often, too often. At first I told myself it was just work, deadlines, pressure, responsibilities. Life happens. But then I started noticing the small things. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked how his day went. The way he would check his phone, then turn the screen away. The way his answers became shorter, colder, distant, like he was present, but not really there. And the silence between us began to grow. Not the comfortable silence we used to share. This one felt heavy, unfamiliar, unsettling. That night, when he said he'd be working late again, I nodded like I always did. I didn't argue. I didn't question him. I just smiled and said okay. But inside, something didn't sit right. There was a feeling I couldn't shake. A quiet voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Something isn't right." I tried to ignore it. I really did. I went into the kitchen, started cleaning up, turned on the television. I even sat down with a book, hoping to distract myself. But nothing worked, because my mind kept going back to him, to the way he said it. He didn't look at me when he spoke. And then, without fully thinking it through, I made a decision, one I never thought I would make. I grabbed my keys, put on my coat, and walked out the door. My hands felt cold, even though the night wasn't. My heart was beating faster than it should, and as I got into the car, I sat there for a moment, just staring ahead, because deep down, I already knew whatever I was about to find would change something, maybe everything. I started the engine, pulled out slowly, keeping enough distance so he wouldn't notice. Every turn he made, I followed. Every stoplight, every corner, every street, I stayed behind him. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, not out of fear, but out of anticipation, because part of me still hoped this was all in my head, that he really was going to work, that I was just overthinking. But then he missed the turn he always took to get to his office. My chest tightened. I leaned forward slightly, watching carefully. He kept driving, past the familiar roads, past the places I recognized, and into a part of town he had never mentioned before. That was the moment everything inside me shifted, because now there was no explanation, no excuse, no reason he should be there. And yet, he didn't hesitate. He drove like he knew exactly where he was going, like this wasn't his first time. I felt something drop in my stomach, heavy, cold, real, and suddenly, this wasn't just a feeling anymore. This was something else, something I couldn't ignore. I slowed down, keeping my distance. My eyes locked on his car. My mind raced faster than I could control. Questions began to flood in. Where was he going? Who was he meeting? How long had this been happening? But none of those questions mattered as much as one. Why? He finally turned into a quiet street, dimly lit, almost hidden. And then he pulled over, not in front of an office, not near any building that looked like work, but outside, a small house, warm lights glowing from inside, curtains slightly drawn, like someone was expecting him. My breath caught. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just watched as he turned off the engine, sit there for a second, then reached for his phone. I looked at it and smiled. A smile I hadn't seen in a long time. And that's when I knew, before he even stepped out of the car, before anything else happened, I knew this didn't work. And whatever was waiting for him inside that house was something he had been hiding from me for a long time, and I was about to find out exactly what it was. I stayed in the car. I didn't move. I didn't breathe any louder than I had to, because the moment felt fragile, like if I did anything too quickly, too suddenly, it would shatter, and I needed to see this clearly. No assumptions, no guessing, just the truth, right in front of me. He stepped out of the car like this was normal, like this was routine, no hesitation. No looking around, no sign of guilt. That's what struck me the most. Not fear, not secrecy, but comfort. The kind of comfort that only comes from familiarity. Like he had been there before, more than once. He adjusted his jacket, ran his hand through his hair, and then walked toward the door. I felt my chest tighten, because that small gesture, that calm confidence, it said more than anything else. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. This was planned, deliberate, intentional. He knocked, just once, soft, like he didn't need to knock again, like the person inside already knew he was there. And seconds later, the door opened. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see, trying to understand. But the angle, the distance, it kept the details just out of reach. All I could see was a figure, a silhouette, someone standing close, too close. The door opened wider, and without hesitation, he stepped inside. The door closed behind him, just like that. No pause, no second thought. Gone. I sat there in silence. My hands are still on the steering wheel. My mind was trying to catch up to what I had just seen, because everything inside me was telling me the same thing. This wasn't the first time. There was a weight in my chest now, not loud, not explosive, but heavy, like something had settled deep inside me and refused to move. I looked at the house again, the lights, the windows, the quiet street. Everything about it felt ordinary, and that's what made it worse. Because betrayal doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it hides in normal places, behind simple doors, on quiet streets, in moments that don't draw attention. I checked the time. He had told me he'd be at work until late, that he had meetings, that he wouldn't be able to answer his phone. And yet, here he was, inside someone else's home, like he belonged there. I swallowed slowly, trying to steady myself, trying to think, because part of me wanted to leave, to drive away, to pretend I never saw any of this. But another part of me, the part that had brought me here, refused to move. I needed to know more. No guesses, not feelings, facts. Time passed, slowly, painfully slow. Every minute felt stretched, like the night itself was holding its breath. I kept my eyes on that door, waiting, watching, hoping for something, anything, that would make this make sense. But nothing did. No one came out. No movement. No sign. Just silence. And that silence, it started to speak louder than anything else, because the longer he stayed inside, the clearer it became. This wasn't quick. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional, comfortable, routine. I leaned back slightly. My grip is loosening on the wheel, but my mind was racing. Images started forming, questions turning into possibilities, possibilities turning into something heavier, something harder to ignore. I thought about all the nights he came home late, all the times he said he was tired, all the moments he seemed distant, and suddenly, they didn't feel random anymore. They felt connected, like pieces of something I hadn't wanted to see before. And now, I couldn't unsee it. I glanced at my phone. For a second, I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice, just to hear what excuse he would give. But I didn't, because I already knew he wouldn't answer. And even if he did, it wouldn't be the truth. So I sat there, in the quiet, in the dark. In reality, I had just stepped into it, and I waited, not for confirmation, but for courage, because whatever I was about to do next, there was no going back from it. And deep down, I knew this night wasn't just about following him. It was about facing something I had been avoiding, something I had felt long before I ever got in that car. The truth, and it was right behind that door. I told myself to stay in the car, to wait, to be patient. But patience started to feel like fear, and I wasn't afraid, not anymore, because whatever was happening behind that door was already worse than anything I could imagine. So I opened the car door, slowly, carefully, like the sound alone could expose me. The night air felt different now, colder, heavier. Each step I took toward that house felt louder than it should. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, too steady, like something inside me had already shifted, like I had crossed a line without realizing it. I reached the edge of the driveway, stopped. I looked at the door, that same door he had just walked through without hesitation. I stood there for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I was preparing myself for whatever was waiting on the other side. Then I moved closer, one step, then another, until I was right there, close enough to see the details, the texture of the wood, the faint light spilling through the edges. And then I heard it. Voices, muffled, soft, but clear enough to know he wasn't alone. I froze, every part of me focused, listening, trying to separate the sounds, trying to understand. His voice came first, low, relaxed, not the voice he used at home. This one was different, lighter, almost familiar in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. And then another voice, a woman. My breath caught. I leaned slightly closer, not enough to be seen, but enough to hear. They were talking, not arguing, not tense, comfortable, like this was normal, like this was something they had done before. And then I heard something that made everything inside me stop. Laughter. His laughter. Soft, easy, unforced, the kind of laugh that used to belong to me. That's when it hit me, not as a shock, not as a sudden realization, but as something quiet, something undeniable. He wasn't just there, he was happy there, and that hurt more than anything else. I stepped back slightly. My mind is trying to process what my heart has already accepted. But something inside me pushed forward again. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not like this. I needed to see, to know, to remove every last doubt. So I moved toward the window. Slow, careful, staying just outside the light. I reached the side of the house, found the edge of the curtain, and looked in. What I saw didn't feel real, not at first, because there he was, standing in someone else's living room, not distant, not guarded, but completely at ease. And across from him was her. I couldn't see her face clearly at first, just her outline, her posture, the way she stood close to him, too close, close enough that there was no space between them. And then she moved slightly, turned just enough for the light to catch her face. And in that moment, everything changed, because I knew her, not vaguely, not from a distance. I knew her in a way that made everything collapse all at once. My chest tightened, my breath caught halfway, because this wasn't just betrayal, this was something else, something deeper, something that cut through every layer of trust I had ever built. I stepped back, slowly, like my body needed space from what I had just seen. My mind is trying to reject it, to find another explanation, another possibility, but there wasn't one, because the truth was standing right there, in front of me, clear, unavoidable, and heavier than anything I had ever felt before. I looked back at the window, just for a second, and this time there was no doubt, no confusion, no question, only one thing left, the realization that night was not just about where he was, it was about who he was with, and what that meant for everything. I stepped away from the window, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to breathe, because standing there, watching them like that, it did something to me. Not anger, not yet, something quieter, something colder, clarity. I walked back toward the front of the house slowly, my steps steady, controlled. The kind of control you don't realize you have until everything else starts slipping. I stopped a few feet from the door. I looked at it again. That same door. The one he walked through without hesitation. Like it belonged to him. Like this place, this moment, this life was already familiar. My hand lifted slightly, then stopped, because this wasn't just about opening a door. This was about crossing into something that couldn't be undone. Once I knocked, there would be no more questions, no more guessing, only the truth, and I was ready for that. I knocked. Once, firm, clear, no hesitation. Inside, the voices stopped. Instantly. That silence. It was different from before. This one was sharp, tense, like everything had frozen at once. I stood there, waiting, not anxious, not nervous, just a present, because I knew they were inside. and I knew they had heard me. Footsteps, slow, careful, coming toward the door. And then it opened. He stood there. For a second he didn't react. Not fully, like his mind hadn't caught up yet, like he hadn't processed what he was seeing. But then it hit him, and I saw it. The shift. His expression is tightening. His posture changed. That moment, that exact moment, that's when everything became real for him. Can I come in? I asked. My voice is calm, even, no edge, no emotion, just clear. He didn't answer right away. And that hesitation, it said everything. I didn't wait for permission. I stepped forward and walked inside. The room felt warm, too warm, like the air itself had been disturbed. And then I saw her, standing a few steps away, watching, still, silent. Her face is fully visible now, and there was no mistake, no confusion, no distance to soften it. I knew her, completely. My chest didn't tighten this time. It settled, because the moment had already passed. The shock, the doubt, all of that was gone. What was left was understanding. I looked at both of them, not rushing, not reacting, just seeing, because this wasn't about catching them anymore. That part was done. This was about what came next. You didn't even think I would find out, I said. Not as a question, as a statement. They didn't respond, neither of them. And that silence, it confirmed more than any words could. He took a small step forward, like he was about to explain, about to fix something that couldn't be fixed. This isn't. He stopped, because he didn't have anything real to say. There wasn't a version of this that made sense. There wasn't an explanation that changed what was already in front of us. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I looked at her, and that's when I saw it. Not confidence, not defiance, something else. Uncertainty. Because now, this wasn't hidden anymore. This wasn't something happening in quiet moments behind closed doors. This was exposed, clear, real, and they were standing in it, with me. I followed you, I said, calm, direct. And this is where you came. No accusation, no raised voice, just the truth. And sometimes, truth is louder than anything else. They stood there, still, waiting, like they were trying to figure out what I was going to do next. But I wasn't trying to surprise them. I wasn't trying to control the moment. I had already done that. The second I knocked on that door, the second I walked in, the second I looked at them and didn't break. Because now, this wasn't about what they did. It was about what I was going to do with it. And that decision was already forming. For a moment, none of us moved. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said, without words. I looked around the room slowly, taking it in, the space, the details, the small things that told a bigger story. A second glass on the table, a jacket placed neatly on the chair, lights dimmed just enough to feel comfortable. Not like the first time, not like something new. This was familiar, lived in, and that realization, it didn't hit me all at once. It settled, quietly, like something finding its place. I turned my attention back to them. He was watching me now, carefully, trying to read me, trying to understand what I was thinking. But I wasn't giving him anything. Not anger, not sadness, not confusion, just presence. And that made him uneasy, because this wasn't the reaction he expected. This wasn't something he could respond to. This isn't what it looks like, he said again, slower this time, more controlled, but still the same empty line. I nodded slightly, not agreeing, just acknowledging that he had spoken. Then what is it? I asked. My voice is steady, not sharp, not emotional, just direct. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, there was more truth than anything he could have said. Because when something is real, you don't search for words. You know them. I shifted my gaze to her. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but now she stepped forward slightly, like she was about to say something, like she felt she should. But even then, she paused, and that pause told me everything. This wasn't something she wanted to explain. This was something she had been comfortable hiding. And now it was standing in the open. You could have told me, I said, not accusing, not emotional, just stating something simple, something true. Neither of them responded, because there was no answer to that. No version of this where honesty had been part of the plan. I walked a few steps further into the room, slow, measured, letting the space speak, letting the silence do what it needed to do. Because silence has a way of exposing things people try to hide. You didn't make a mistake, I continued. You made a decision that shifted something. Not dramatically, but enough, because those words carry weight. They remove excuses, they remove confusion, they leave only one thing: responsibility. He looked down for a second, then back at me, but still, no real response, no truth, no clarity, and I realized something in that moment. I wasn't going to get it. Not from him, not from her, because this wasn't something they were ready to own. Not fully, not honestly, and that was fine, because I didn't need it anymore. I had already seen enough. He took a step closer. This just happened, he said, and that was it. That was the moment. Because those words, they didn't just fall flat, they exposed everything. Nothing just happens like this. Not with this level of comfort, not with this kind of familiarity, not with this much silence behind it. I held his gaze, calm, unmoved. No, I said, it didn't, and I left it there. Because I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to explain. The truth was already standing in the room with us, clear, undeniable, and heavier than anything they were trying to say. I looked at her one more time, really looked, not as someone I knew, not as someone I trusted, but as someone who had made a choice, the same way he had. And that was enough, more than enough, because now there was nothing left to figure out, only something left to decide. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask another question, because there was nothing left to understand. The room had already said everything, and I had already heard it, clearly, completely. I stood there for a moment longer. Not because I needed time, but because I was making a decision, not about them. That part was already done. About me. About what I was willing to carry from this moment forward. And what I wasn't. I took a slow breath. Then I looked at him, not as my husband, not as the man I had built a life with, just as someone standing in front of me. Separate, clear, uncovered. You didn't think I would come here, I said. My voice is steady, even. He didn't respond, because the truth in that statement was obvious. This had been built on the belief that I wouldn't see it, that I wouldn't question it, that I would stay where I was and accept what I was told. But that version of me was no longer standing in that room. I shifted my gaze to her. And you didn't think I would find out? I added. She looked down briefly, then back at me. But still, nothing. No denial. No explanation. Just presence. And that silence. It confirmed everything again. I nodded once. Not to them. To myself. Because something had settled. Completely. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm not here to ask you to explain this. Or fix it. That changed the energy. Not loudly, but enough. Because now they understood. This wasn't a conversation they could control. This wasn't something they could talk their way out of. This was something final. I took a small step back, creating space. Not distance, just clarity. You made your choices, I continued, and now I'm making mine. The words landed, simple, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. He took another step forward, like he wanted to stop me, like he wanted to say something that would shift this, but I didn't give him the space, because I had already moved past that point. There was nothing he could say now that would return anything that had already been lost. I turned slightly, not walking away yet, just enough to break the alignment between us, because I wasn't standing in that position anymore. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't holding on. I wasn't asking. I looked around the room one last time, not for answers, not for confirmation, just to take in the reality of it, because this place, this moment, this truth, it was no longer something hidden. It was something I had seen, fully, and once you see something like that, you don't go back, you move forward. I turned back toward the door. My hand reached for it, not slowly, not dramatically, just with certainty. And as I opened it, I paused for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I understood what this moment meant. This wasn't just me leaving a room. This was me leaving something behind, something that no longer belonged to me, something that had already been broken long before I got there, and I wasn't going to carry it with me. I stepped outside. The air felt different, cooler, clearer, like everything had shifted into place. Behind me, the door stayed open, but I didn't turn around because I didn't need to. Everything I needed to see, I had already seen it, and everything I needed to know, I already knew. I walked back to my car without looking behind me, not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. There was nothing left in that house for me, nothing left to understand, nothing left to hold on to. I opened the door, sat down, and closed it quietly. For a moment, I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes forward, not rushing to leave, not overwhelmed, just still, because something inside me had changed, not in a loud way, not in a way anyone else could see, but in a way I could feel it clearly. I wasn't carrying confusion anymore. I wasn't holding on to questions. I wasn't waiting for explanations. All of that had been replaced with something else. Clarity. And clarity has a way of bringing calm. Even in moments like this, I started the engine, slow, controlled, and pulled away from the curb. The house faded behind me. The streetlights passed one by one. Everything around me looked the same, but nothing felt the same, because I wasn't the same person driving back. I wasn't the woman who sat in that kitchen earlier, believing everything was still intact. That version of me had already been left behind, and I was moving forward without her. I drove without turning on the radio. No music, no distraction, just the quiet sound of the road beneath me, and my own thoughts, settling, not racing, not overwhelming, just clear. Piece by piece, moment by moment, I thought about everything, the signs I ignored, the moments that didn't make sense, the silence that grew between us, and how I chose to believe instead of a question, not because I was blind, because I trusted, and that trust, it wasn't a weakness, it was something real, something I gave fully, and now I understood something. The problem wasn't that I trusted, the problem was they didn't deserve it. I pulled into the driveway slowly, turned off the engine, and sat there again for a second, looking at the house, the same house I had walked out of earlier that night, the same space that held everything I thought was solid. Now, it felt different, not broken, just changed, because I wasn't walking back into it the same way. I opened the car door and stepped out. The night air felt steady, grounded, like everything had settled into place. I walked toward the front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The silence inside the house felt familiar, but now it didn't feel empty. It felt clear, like something had been removed, something that no longer belonged. I set my keys down. I walked into the living room and stood there for a moment, just taking it in, because this space, it was still mine, not in the way it was before, but in a way that mattered more now, because I was standing in it, fully aware, fully present, and no longer carrying anything that didn't belong to me. I sat down slowly, not out of exhaustion, but out of release, because the weight I thought I would feel, it wasn't there. What I felt instead was something else, something steady, something quiet, something strong, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself to breathe without tension, without questions, without doubt, because everything had already been answered. I didn't call anyone. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't sit there trying to explain it to someone else, because I didn't need anyone to confirm what I had already seen. I didn't need another opinion. I didn't need comfort at that moment. What I needed was space, space to sit with it, to understand it, to let everything settle without interruption. I leaned back slightly and looked around the room again. Everything was still in its place. Nothing had changed on the surface. But the meaning behind everything that had shifted completely. I noticed small things, things I would have ignored before. A picture on the wall, the way the light hit the corner of the room, the quiet stillness of the house, and for the first time, I wasn't looking at it through what I believed. I was seeing it for what it was, real, unfiltered, and that kind of clarity, it changes everything. I stood up slowly and walked toward the bedroom, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving forward, because avoiding it would have meant holding on to something that no longer existed, and I wasn't going to do that. I opened the door, stepped inside, and paused for a moment. The space felt familiar, but distant, like something I had known, but no longer belonged to. I walked over to the closet. I opened it and stood there, looking at everything inside. His clothes, mine, hanging side by side, like nothing had changed, but everything had. I reached out and touched one of his jackets, just for a second, not to hold on to it, just to acknowledge it, to recognize what it represented, and then I let it go, because I understood something clearly now. This wasn't about what I was losing. It was about what I was no longer willing to carry. I stepped back and closed the closet, quietly, gently, not as an emotional moment, as a final one. I turned and walked back into the living room, picked up my phone, hold it for a moment, not to call him, not to message him, but to make a decision. And that decision didn't require words. It required action. Clear, simple, final. I placed the phone down again, because some decisions don't need to be announced. They just need to be made. I walked to the window and looked outside. The night was still, unchanged, but inside, everything had shifted into place. There was no confusion left, no hesitation, no need to revisit what had already been revealed. Because once the truth becomes clear, you don't go back to searching for it. You move forward with it, and that's exactly what I was about to do. I stood there for a moment longer, just looking out into the night, not searching for anything, not waiting for anything, just standing in a space that finally felt clear, because everything that had been hidden wasn't hidden anymore. Everything that had been uncertain wasn't uncertain anymore. And once you reach that point, there's nothing left to hold on to, only something left to release. I turned away from the window and walked back into the center of the room. Slow, steady, present, because this moment wasn't about what I had just lost. It was about what I had just understood. And that understanding, it didn't break me. It grounded me. I looked around one last time, at the walls, in space, at the life I had built inside it, and for the first time, I wasn't looking at it with attachment. I was looking at it with clarity, because what I thought it was, and what it truly was, were no longer the same. And I accepted that fully, without resistance, without hesitation. I reached for my keys again, not out of urgency, not out of escape, but out of decision, because staying in a place that no longer holds truth is a choice, and so is leaving it. I walked toward the door. I opened it and paused, just for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of this moment. This wasn't just a step outside. This was a step forward, into something unknown, but real, and that was enough. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back, not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. Everything I needed was already in front of me, and everything behind me had already shown me what it was. I walked to my car, opened the door, sat down, and took one steady breath. No tension, no doubt, no questions, just clarity. And as I started the engine, one thought stayed with me. He didn't lose me tonight. He lost me the moment he chose something else and believed I would never see it. And now I had, and I chose myself without hesitation, without fear, without looking back. If you made it this far, I want you to be honest. What would you have done at that moment? Would you have walked away like I did? Or stayed and demanded answers? Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't finding the truth. It's deciding what to do after you've seen it. If this story touched you in any way, let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had a moment where everything changed in silence, this space is yours too. Don't forget to subscribe, because some stories aren't just told, they're understood.